A lot of Nintendo franchises recently have been getting revived with new entries, remakes, or even just ports, and it's lovely to see. But what Nintendo franchises deserve to be revived next? Firstly, let's put some guidelines in place for what we consider to be a dormant franchise. For the sake of this video, I will be considering a series dormant if it hasn't had a new entry for at least 10 years. I know some people may disagree, and that is completely fine, but just to keep things simple, we will be sticking at 10 years. The first series I would love to see revived is none other than Punch-Out! This classic franchise debuted back in 1984 in the arcade and then got its own NES release with Mike Tyson unlockable at the end with an Inkling outfit.
I'm beautiful.
Followed by Super Punch-Out!, various spin-offs, and the amazing Punch-Out! For the Wii made by Next Level Games. There was a 15-year gap between the latest release and the one prior, but it was well worth the wait because Next Level Games went all out with this one in the most Next Level Games way possible. If you played one of their titles before, you'll know they fill their games to the brim with little details and charm like no other studio. Now before this revival, I wasn't really bothered about getting a new Punch-Out! Game, I just saw it as an arcade classic that had its time, but the Wii version makes me desperately want another entry. Let Next Level Games handle it again. It's almost been 15 years and I want to beat the crap out of Donkey Kong again. Up next is Kid Icarus, and this is similar to Punch-Out! In the vein that it started out in the 80s, had a second release not long after, in this case on the Game Boy, and then had a very long gap. 21 years until its next entry, which was Kid Icarus Uprising on the 3DS, made by the legend himself. A lot of people consider this to be one of the greatest games on the 3DS, and for good reason. I mean, this series took a massive jump and could have gone either way. I do think it was held back a little bit by the 3DS, especially when it was released, and would perform really well on the Switch. Now there have been many rumors, as I'm sure you've heard, that Uprising will receive a remaster on the Switch. Whether this will happen, I'm not sure, but I would be completely fine with it, especially as it has been a while since Uprising, and Nintendo may want to test the waters a little bit before dumping loads of resources and money into a completely new game. Fair enough. So what are you waiting for, Nintendo? The next series I have spoken about quite passionately before, the Tomodachi series. Yes, believe it or not, it has been more than 10 years since the last mainline entry, Tomodachi Life, released in Japan, and look, I've covered it before in this video, which you should totally watch, but this series makes so much sense on the Switch. Think about all the people who just bought a Switch in 2020 for Animal Crossing. They would likely buy this game too. It would do insane numbers, and even Tomodachi Life sold incredibly well on the 3DS. Out of all of the games on this list, this one would probably sell 10 times better than all of them. So Nintendo, if you like money, make a new game in the Tomodachi series. Up next is the Excite series, which started off as Excite Bike on the NES back in 1984 and had multiple releases such as Excite Bike 64, Excite Truck, Excite Box, and more. The last entry we got was Excite Box in 2009, unless you count the WiiWare title. Nintendo needs to make more smaller games like this that they can just throw out on the eShop at any time, a quick $20 to $30 game, and call it a day. These don't need to be these big full releases with all these bells and whistles, and that is completely fine. I usually love smaller games like this. They're always so much fun. Quality titles that you can count on having a good time with. Maybe throw Wave Race in that category as well, or heck, even Pilot Wings. They would make an awesome small little release just to fill out gaps when things are quiet, and I'd love to see more of them. Wario Land. Shake It was the last game on the Wii in 2008, and honestly, I think there is still a place in the market for this series. I know we have WarioWare, and some may think that Wario doesn't deserve to have two different series, as there are some Mario characters without any spin-off games. But these honestly are just some of the best 2D platformers Nintendo has put out, and I would love to have more platformers in general. The more platformers, the better. I hope one day this series can make a comeback. Now, I've saved this one until last because this is a very big hear me out, okay? Let me cook, let me finish. Ice Climbers. Now hold on a second. I know it sounds crazy, but for some reason I've always had this vision of an Ice Climber revival, but not in the way you would expect. Firstly, just to get this out there, I know full well this will never happen, okay? Like, ever. And I know the original Ice Climbers is just one of those games you play for 5 minutes and feel absolutely nothing. But look at the original Kid Icarus. a fine game, and then look at the Game Boy game. Would you have expected the next entry to look like this? Which is why I think a 3D platformer ice climber game where the whole premise is you making your way up this gigantic mountain, similar to Celeste in the sense that the higher you go, the harder it gets, the crazier it is. I just have this idea in my head that probably only sounds good to me and everyone else thinks it sounds awful, but I don't know, man. It could be a really unique game, especially with there being 2 characters. It would be perfect for co-op. Even having both of them linked together by a rope like they do for their Up B and Smash could be really cool, like when climbing up the mountain. Obviously, it wouldn't all be climbing. There would be lots of different platforming sections, enemies, and the mountain could be split into different sections. But instead of the traditional level select screen or hub world, you look up the mountain and there you go, you see all the levels, and the final one of course right at the top, which is probably like blurred out by clouds and everything and has lightning striking down on it. It's all there for you to see, but you just have to make your way up there to progress. I know it will never happen, and Nintendo would never put this much resources into Ice Climbers, a dead franchise that everyone mostly knows from Smash Bros, but I thought it sounded cool to myself, but everyone else probably thinks it sounds like an awful idea. Speaking of awful ideas, the last dormant franchise I think that should be revived is Call of Duty.
Sunrise.